First, in April of 1919, they mail 30 bombs. One of them ends up at the home of Senator Thomas Hardwick, blows his maid's hands up. And then on June 2nd of the same year, 1919, they do another wave of bombings, and one of them ends up on the doorstep of the Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, and now he's pissed. So in July 1919, he goes to the House Appropriations Committee. He asks for $500,000. He gets $100K. But now he's got his moolah, he got his cash to expand his operations. And he's going to do that through the Bureau of Investigations, which is going to be the FBI, a new division called the General Intelligence Division, led by J. Edgar Hoover, the ripe young age of 24. He's going to make his mark soon enough. First they start going after just general anarchists using criminal law, using statutes for treason that go back to the Civil War. And they do a raid of anarchists in Buffalo, New York, my hometown. And that ends up getting tossed out. A federal judge rules that you can't use somebody's membership in a group to criminalize their activities if they haven't done anything wrong. You have to wait till they act. So he starts scratching his noggin. This is Mr. Palmer here, and he ends up thinking, well, why don't I just use immigration acts? Because it's easier to deport somebody than to arrest somebody. So let's do it. All right, guys, we're getting so close to the Palmer raids. We are now in September of 1919, and we have the Boston police strike, where the Boston police are trying to form an umbrella union under the AFL, and they go on strike, and there's kind of incidences of violence when the police aren't doing their job, and the public really starts to turn in a big way against labor. The press is blaming Bolshevik revolutionaries for infiltrating the Boston Police Department, and it's not going to be for another 20 years that the Boston, or the police departments in general, are going to be able to unionize. But that event, combined with, in October, the United States Senate passing a unanimous resolution demanding answers from the Attorney General, Mr. Palmer, is really going to make him act. And he begins his actions on November 7th, 1919, which is symbolic because it's the second year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. And he goes on a rampage, basically. He targets the Union of Russian Workers, which is an anarchist group of Russian immigrants. So this is, right in the center of kind of the danger zone for nativists. And he does kind of sweeping arrests. And I think the biggest problem not only is that really he doesn't have any strong evidence on all of the people in the Union of Russian Workers, they just belong to this group which espouses beliefs that could lead to criminal actions, but anybody that was at a meeting or anybody that was in the area or anybody that got kind of swept up is going to end up having their rights denied to them and having them locked up. Literally, guys, thousands of people are swept up in these raids, and there's accusations of torture and intimidations, of beatings, of really kind of a police state in order to cleanse the United States of these dissidents. The reason Palmer is able to do it under immigration law is because he's working through the Department of Labor. And really, his guy, J. Edgar Hoover, is really manhandling and twisting arms on these Department of Labor bureaucrats in order to get these illegal warrants. And it's Hoover that really arranges the second wave in January 1920, where 30 cities in 23 states had thousands and thousands, again, locked up that belonged to groups or were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it ends up that we end up arresting 10,000 people. 3,500 of them end up being detained in prisons and jails, and only 556 actually got deported through the Immigration Act of 1928, which deemed their membership in these groups to be dangerous enough to kick them out of the country. So let's look at kind of the effects of the Palmer raids. Now you know what the Palmer raids are, and then we can giddy up for the word. The largest effect is going to be that this is just really symbolic of the Red Scare, and the Red Scare is going to sweep up many Americans in the 1920s. People like Sacco and Vanzetti. If you haven't learned about them, then you should probably go Google that right away. But these are two Italian socialist anarchists that are put to death in the electric chair for crimes that they probably did not commit. And also organizations like the ACLU are going to raise their voice. Of course, the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. In 1920, Felix Frankfurter pens the report of illegal practices of the United States Department of Justice under the ACLU. He's a future Supreme Court justice, and he's really going to write that these were illegal warrants, that we violated the Constitution, not just like the First Amendment, right to assembly, but a whole string of amendments: the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment. So there's really a lot of attention that is drawn to it. Not that we're going to solve the problem in the 1920s. We also get immigration laws that are going to pass in the 1920s, like the 1924 National Origins Act, that's really going to close the door on immigration from these types of troublesome countries like Germany and Italy and Russia. But an immediate effect for the Attorney General himself is he's going to go one step too far in claiming that he's a know-it-all. And he claims that May 1st, pretty big in communist circles, there's going to be this huge revolutionary attack in the United States government. And when May Day comes and goes and nothing really happens, his dreams for the presidency, which he was hoping to run as a Democrat, are quickly crushed. That doesn't mean that Palmer is completely wrong. We still have Galleonites that are planting bombs. In 1920, another bomb was put right in front of Wall Street. It was the largest terrorist attack up to that time point, where 30 people died instantly when that bomb went off and hundreds were injured. I think the bigger idea is that this is kind of a Red Scare theme, that during this crisis of the Red Scare, these bombings and the Bolshevik Revolution and this fear that's running through the United States, that's going up our spine of nativism, and I would say racism and xenophobia, is going to lead to illegal actions by the federal government that are going to violate people's most basic civil rights. But all in the name of a safer society. So how do you like that? So you could put it down in the comments below if you think the Palmer raids were a necessary endeavor in order to secure the United States and our national security, or whether you think the government was just being tyrannical and abusive and violating people's civil liberties for no good reason. If you haven't checked out Hip Hughes history before, you can do it. You can click my face. Click my face right there. You'll zip off on the internets to my YouTube.
Okay, so there's your video on the Palmer raid. Right towards the end, Hip Hughes was talking about, what this is going to mean moving forward. The very first thing we're going to talk about when we start Section 3 is things like immigration acts, how it is that the United States targets certain regions of Europe and basically says, if you're from this area of Europe, we don't want you in this country, or we don't want people from that part of Europe coming to this country, because they're seen as being troublemakers, that they don't contribute in any positive way to society. The thing is that, yeah, there are some isolated incidents here and there that I guess support some of this argument. But all in all, if you look at the number of people that are coming to the United States from these countries, they're coming here to try to make a better way of life. The problem is, for a lot of these people, they want to live here in the United States the same way they were living in the country that they came from. They want to continue to speak their language. They want to continue to practice the same religion. Most of these countries practice Christian religions anyway. They wanted to eat the same foods. They wanted to dress the same. And the problem is, the thought back then was, if you're coming to the U.S., you need to become Americanized. Really not sure what Americanized means, but essentially what it means is, number one, you speak English, first and foremost. Number two, if you don't practice a Christian faith, you just need to start practicing a Christian faith. Number three, you need to dress the way Americans do. Number four, you need to eat foods that are, that are similar to what Americans eat. If there's another one, you're going to recognize the same types of holidays that are already being recognized here in the United States. And probably the biggest one is, other than the language thing, is you have to accept the way that you're going to be governed. And apart from the language aspect, that was one that a lot of people moving here had a hard time accepting, is the way that they were going to be governed. And this really sets up a really ugly time for foreigners, whether they were someone that just immigrated to the U.S. or maybe someone that had been here 10, 12 years. Okay, sorry about that little interruption. And so, and like I was saying, and it's not just recent immigrants. You have people that have maybe been here 10, 15 years, but they haven't gone through a process known as assimilation. I'll explain more about this when we are talking about chapter unit 3. But assimilation is just simply you drop the way you lived in your home country and now you adopt American standards, the American way of life. And you see, not everyone was doing that, and those people became targets. And as we're going to see is there's a huge rise in Ku Klux Klan activity because now all of a sudden they have a reason for existing again. I'm not saying by any means that this was what A. Mitchell Palmer had in mind at all, but unfortunately it was an ugly byproduct of what Palmer did, was that now all of a sudden, if the government is singling out these individuals, now you're going to have radical groups like the KKK doing the exact same thing. Problem is that the KKK, they don't have the same standards that the government has to abide by. And so the early 20s is just going to be a really ugly time for certain groups of people here in the United States. So this concludes everything for this second lecture, and you'll be taking the quiz here soon.